Yeah, but like I say, you just brought up the promoter deal, so that's one I had to bring up. And go on back to the evolution at Rathman.
Sure.
And toss that in. A lot of people don't realize Speedrome's been there before 1968.
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
And that's part of the history. So whenever Sparky's ready, okay. So go ahead and like I say, I'm John Mahoney, etc.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, I'm John Mahoney. I'm from Greenwood, Indiana. I've been going to the Speedrome ever since I was a teenager, and as we'll find out, I went as a fan when it was the Art Zip Speedway, which was a few years ago, and saw some memorable races then. I've been a track photographer there for many years with the midgets, and also a friend of mine and I, Gene Crucian and I, promoted midget races there for about 3 years, and that was an interesting period of time too. That's when we leased the track from Leroy Warner.
And you've had an interesting place for you now in the history record, when you've actually filled in some gaps already. But tell us about being there for Ed Elysian and
Dick Rathman,
who were IndyCar stars back in the 50s and into the 60s, long gone now.
Yes.
And they were actually at the Speedrome early on in a stock car. Tell us about that.
Yes, that was 1959. I was a really big Ed Elysian fan, only because I'd been a sprint car fan before that and saw him race sprint cars in the Midwest, and he was a really hard charger. And to make a little aside, when he got the John Zink car at Indy in 1958, I was telling my friends, you watch, this guy's a lot better than people realize, and he ended up in the front row, in the middle of the front row, and on the pole was Dick Rathman, and they were real rivals. And of course, then they had the huge pileup in '58, and Elysian had his problems with the sanctioning body and everybody else for a while. But he was reinstated, and I think the Indy cars were racing at Milwaukee that day in 1959. But they advertised that Dick Rathman and Ed Elysian would be at the Speedrome that night racing stock cars. And I was just talking to Donald Davidson a while ago, and he believes that may have even been a USAC sanctioned stock car race at the Speedrome. But at any rate, so my hero was going to be there that night in a stock car, and I was very excited about that. And they started the hot laps, and they weren't there. But the announcers kept saying that they will be there. They were going to be boarding a plane soon from Milwaukee and flying to Indianapolis. And they actually had some heat races, and they still weren't there. And I was starting to get a little nervous about that. But finally, they did arrive, and just before they arrived, the guy driving Elysian's car crashed and did some front end damage, not serious. And I still remember them walking across the track, both of them wearing white pants and just t-shirts. And Ed immediately started looking at his car and reached down and pulled the bumper out just by himself. He was a big guy. Mm-hmm. At any rate, the races, he did all right, although he spun a couple of times just because he was trying so hard. And I don't even recall who won the race, but it was a thrill seeing those guys racing again, because Ed had been suspended for quite a while, and these were some of his first races back. But it was a fun night.
You're mostly famous for your work as a open wheel photographer, but you've also been, as you shared with us, a promoter in open wheel racing out there. You've been able to follow the history of open wheel racing at the Speedrome and throughout the planet, basically, for 60 some odd years now. What has been the changes you've seen in there that was significant to the Speedrome as far as open wheel racing? Midgets used to be king in the 40s, that's why they built the place. Mm-hmm. But through the 50s and 60s, it's kind of went downhill. What do you think has the Speedrome been a good answer, part of the problem, or what do you think it figures into the open wheel racing scene?
That's really a good question. I always admired John Stiles for sticking with the midgets throughout the years, and sometimes with crowds that were a little less than profitable. But we saw midgets race. I saw midgets race at the Speedrome back in the 60s, probably, and they only had 7 cars. And when Gene Crucian and I decided to lease the track from Leroy Warner at the time to promote some CORA races, Car Owners Racing Association, I met with Ed Adair, who was the president of CORA. Met him at the White Front, of all places, and it was a favorite bar.
On 16th Street there.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
It was a favorite pub of both of ours, yes. And I was very worried. We'd already made arrangements with Leroy Warner to get the track, and now we had to deal with Cora. And I was very concerned about, 5 cars showing up or something like that. And the purse, I believe, was $1,500. And Ed said, I'll make you a deal, John. I made almost all the arrangements for the races because my partner, Gene Crucian, lived up in Munster, Indiana, way north, so he couldn't be there all the time. But he said, if we'll bring you 30 cars. I'll guarantee 30 cars. And if perhaps if there's less than 30 cars, you can deduct $50 from the purse for every car less than 30. But for every car over 30, you add $25 to the purse. And I said, sounds fair enough to me. We had 47 cars that night. I got to the track about 1 in the afternoon, and there were already 15 cars lined up even before they opened the pit gate. But we had a lot of fun that night. That was in September of '72. And then we went ahead and promoted the races in '73 every other Wednesday, because Speedrome, of course, was busy on the weekends, and that was their profitable nights. And still leasing the track from Fay and Leroy Warner. And our last race, we did a few in '74, and then we stopped, and our last race was in '75, May of '75, and we promoted a USAC midget race there. And Sleepy Trip won the Trophy Dash, and Bruce Roby, a super modified driver from Ohio, won the feature, but had a huge field of cars. It was really a fun night. And overall, we probably broke even. We had some good nights, some lousy nights. I still remember being in the infield after the midget race, and somebody came up to Leroy Warner, and I was standing nearby and asked Leroy, says, are these guys making any money? And Leroy says, not much money, but they're making a lot of friends, And that was the truth. We just had a heck of a lot of fun. And one bonus we had in 1973, Rich Vogler and his father, Don, had been suspended by USAC. So they ran Cora that whole season. So we had Rich Vogler every other Wednesday night racing with the Cora, and he won several of the races too. But
Vogler suspensions were kind of par for the course there for a while.
It's
almost a tradition.
I don't know where they got into it, but they got into a fight after a race, and I think even an official got involved in it, and so USAC put him down for a year. And so, like I say, we had Rich the whole season.
Do you ever have a favorite driver out there other than, obviously Rich Vogler's always been is sort of the highlight in everybody. Anybody else comes to mind, somebody that always stuck out in your mind, somebody you enjoyed watching out there?
Boy, that's kind of a tough question. I remember distinctly the Speedrome was the scene of Tony Stewart's very first USAC race, race. And I was there that night, and an old friend, Crocky Wright, who was a huge midget fan and rider and former driver, he had followed Tony Stewart when he was running 3/4 midgets in Rushville. And he said, John, you better watch that kid. He's going to be good. And so I ran over and took a nice pose shot of Tony. Still one of my favorite shots because it was his very first USAC race. Probably the one driver I loved watching more than ever was Rich Vogler over the years. He just knew that track. He was aggressive as heck and won a bunch of races there. Mel Kenyon, of course, was another regular and a favorite, and it'd be hard to pin down one special guy, but I think probably Vogler was the guy that I loved watching race there more than anything.
Was there any, obviously your heart's always been in the open wheel scene, and for a lot of us growing up through the late 70s, we knew John Mahoney as the guy down in the infield with that big camera. And we were so jealous because you had your lens was bigger than my lens kind of deal. But as a photographer now, and this would be something that a lot of folks will realize, that was a pretty significant role and pretty rather popular role for the 60s and 70s. What would you think your role is as a photographer, though, as time went by? What were you trying to accomplish out there? You see you guys, at some tracks you were able to get in the infield, Speedrome, we used to let you do that, and obviously when we almost killed a few, they didn't. What were you trying to accomplish there as a photographer when you were out there?
Well, for a good part of the time, in fact, for most of the time, I was shooting for United States Auto Club, USAC, and covering their races. So there were some specific shots we had to get. And in those days in the newsletter, Dick Jordan would publish usually an action shot of the winner and somebody else, a victory lane shot. and then any other action that happened, possibly a crash or something like that. So that was probably number one that I needed to get those shots during the race. Other than that, I just shot everything. I found out early in my career that, if you shoot 100 shots, 10 of them are going to be darn good, and nobody needs to see those other 90, So, and of course, those were film days for most of the time, so we had a bag full of film with us all the time. But then I was shooting it for my own self, too, for working with other magazines, publications, and so forth. So I was kind of just building my own files, too, at the time. The Speedrome, yeah, we couldn't, in Leroy Warner's days, we could shoot in the infield a little bit. But it really made sense that Speedrome's not the place to be in the infield, because those guys end up going through the infield half the time. And so we shot from outside, usually outside turn 2, or we could shoot from the flag stand in turn 4. And really got some great shots, some nice head-on photos and things like that. So it was a good place to shoot too.
Do you have a favorite race that sticks out in mind out there that you saw out there or something?
Oh boy, I think.
I mean, obviously, seeing Ed Elysian and Dick Rathman in the stock car.
Oh yeah,
I've seen films of Rathman later on in his career at the fairgrounds and whatnot. But just seeing those two in a Speedrome stock car and Speedrome, that
stood out. John, your dad, John Stiles, was a very innovative promoter, and when he decided to do the 500 lappers, those were
500 lap midget races.
Yeah, 500 lap midget races. And people were saying, it can't be done, it's not going to work. And really, those turned out really pretty dramatic, with Lonnie Carruthers making one pit stop with about 10 laps to go, and because he built a huge lead.
Yep.
So some of those races I think were favorites. Oh boy. I'd say those probably stood out the most in individual races. Like I say, I'm getting old and I've been racing without a helmet too long, so I can't remember too many individual shows. But again, Vogler was in the middle of a lot of exciting finishes too. That's for sure.
Now I guess again, because you have the photographer's eye, what car was always your favorite to take a picture of? Do you have one of those?
I think when Jonathan Bird was sponsoring, I hate bringing up Vogler, but Jonathan Bird sponsored Rich's car for several years, and it was
Colonel
probably
Sanders right on the hood there.
What's it? Yep.
Because you made the cover of Open Wheel magazine with that one, if I recall.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. So that was one I always followed. Mel Kenyon always had really very good-looking cars too, and in fact, I shot a cover for Open Wheel magazine of Mel Kenyon's car. And I was riding. I remember that now. Just when I saw the Coke machine out in the lobby area there, I was hanging onto the back of that thing, and Mel was driving right behind us, and I was just shooting shots just so I could get one good shot for the cover. And that was a thrill, hanging onto that thing too. I don't know who was driving it, but he was going at a pretty good clip.
Yeah, that was not. I've ridden that back seat many a time. It's not. It's quite a scare sometimes.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Anything that sticks out about the Speedrome that 20 years from now you're going to want people to remember and know about? That was part of the John Mahoney experience.
I'll tell you. Well, there was one experience, and again, it was thanks to your dad. Gene Crucian and I ended up owning a couple of midgets too, and for Roy Carruthers, and Roy raced at the Speedrome for several years in one of our midgets, and we asked John if maybe some Saturday morning or I can't remember exactly when, it was 1984 when we did it, I don't remember what day, if we could have a bunch of us guys just hot lap the midget, if he'd let us do that. And he said, yeah, I'll let you do it. So about 8 of us got to hot lap the midget at the Speedrome, which was a real thrill. And for one of the guys, he got out of the car and said, I'm buying one. A guy named Larry Hoppus, he ended up buying sprint cars, he ran dirt cars, but it was all because of the opportunity just to play in that midget at the track. So, and for years and years and years, the weekly shows at the Speedrome, that was the place to be here in Indianapolis, and it really kept midget racing going in this area. And of course, he had some of the night before the 500 shows there too, after 16th Street closed, and then they were kind of at different tracks. So I was always at those too, for sure.
Yep. Anything else that you need to share about the place or want to say that
No, I just had so many great nights there, and living in Greenwood, I mean, it's 20 minutes away, so it was really a fantastic opportunity to me to go racing every week and get some great shots and really enjoy the racing and the track.
Well, thank you, John Mahoney, and just stay so I can get you unhooked.